Hare Om Namaha. If any devotee wants to visualize today's mosaic of what only appears to be Prabhupada's branch of the Hare Krishna movement, first consider its governing body. In the process of such analysis, no one can possibly remain a simpleton. There are many details that must be understood in the right way. Not so easy a task. Maya doesn't let anyone understand it, actually understand it, if he or she looks only for simple answers, ignoring the complexities that constitutes the puzzle, known as the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation. A cavalier attitude and paltry research effort will only prove counterproductive. There is a complicated history to unpack, and that should be readily admitted. As such, it helps to also secure the following 6 qualities. 1. Some knowledge of Guru Tattva and Siddhanta in Vaishnavism. 2. Some knowledge of the authorized bhakti process. 3. Some knowledge, as much as possible, of quotes from Prabhupada on these subjects. 4. Ability to process solid conclusions free from bias. 5. Knowledge of facts comprising an accurate history of the governing body commission. And 6. Good logic and reasoning acumen. Today's presentation obviously centers on the power node of the fabricated so-called ISKCON Confederation, and that power node is the vitiated G.B.C. Accepting the right conclusion about that commission, and you will be given that conclusion throughout this presentation, will be tested. If you are able to hold firm to that conclusion, you will hold fast to all of the components comprising that conclusion. Mayaka forces will attempt to deconstruct, in a false way, each and every one of those pieces, sometimes merely focusing on one such component only, in order to create doubt about the right conclusion. Again, you are not merely being given this conclusion. You are being given many of its components, the pieces of the puzzle that comprise the total picture of inherent vice and the Peter principle, endemic to the vitiated G.B.C. Now you may ask, what is inherent vice? Inherent vice is the tendency in physical objects to deteriorate because of the fundamental instability of their pieces, and as such, inherent vice is directly related to the law of entropy. To approach this analysis with mistaken knowledge and a happy-go-lucky attitude precludes any possibility of understanding it. It takes effort, so be prepared to make that effort. Let us all remember one of Prabhupada's chief maxims. The devotee needs a bona fide guru. The bona fide guru initiates his disciple. If the prospective disciple requires a bona fide guru, how can there be a genuine initiation received from anyone but a bona fide guru. In the folio, there are 322 references to quote-unquote bona fide guru. Add 4 more when the Latin words bona and fide are not separated as linguistically they should be. There are 20 references to bogus guru. As such, this topic of bona fide guru and bogus guru has many references. If it has many references, and it does, then this topic must be important. It is more than merely important. It is essential. Real spiritual practice and process takes place after genuine initiation from a bona fide guru, the bona fide guru. The following are 4 quotations to substantiate this fact. As per his treatise, Civilization and Transcendence, Prabhupada says, quote, "The guru is essential, but why go to a bogus guru? You will be cheated. The guru is necessary, that's a fact, but go to the real guru," unquote. As per his platform lecture, dated April 19th, 1974, quote, "You must find out somebody who you can accept as guru. The guru must be bona fide. Otherwise, what is the use of accepting a bogus guru?" Unquote. As per his platform lecture of February 14th, 1976, quote, "First of all, guru must be bona fide, not a bogus guru. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, Yare Dekha, Tare Kaha, Krishna Upadesh, Amara Agyaya Guru Honya, Tara Aidesha. He is guru," unquote. And as per a room conversation that Prabhupada was in, dated January 17th, 1971, quote, "Therefore the Vedas say tad vigyanartam. In order to know that transcendental science, Sagarum eva vigachet. He must go to a guru. He must approach. A guru means not bogus guru. One who knows, expert. But one has to do that. There is no alternative," unquote. So let us consider this governing body commission, the power node of ISKCON. The G.B.C. was formed as an unincorporated entity in late July 1970. It responded to a situation provoked by 4 ISKCON leaders attempting to centralize the movement in Greenwich Village, New York, while declaring that Prabhupada was displeased with his disciples in America. They also declared that Prabhupada was God, although paradoxically, they locked him in his room so that he could not interfere with their scheme. This disturbance was crushed, and the newly formed G.B.C. was integral to dismantling it. The 4 wayward leaders were given sannyas and separated. Prabhupada had indicated during this saga that he wanted to retire in order to produce his translations and purports to various Vaishnava texts. The G.B.C. itself was governed by a document called the Direction of Management. This charter was produced by an ad hoc committee under the direction of His Divine Grace. How many of Prabhupada's disciples constituted that committee is unclear, although 3 of them did sign the governing charter as witnesses. In the Direction of Management, that charter, there is also mention of an ad hoc committee to create a constitution. The Direction of Management was a governing charter, not the Constitution of ISKCON Incorporated. Such a constitution was never produced while Prabhupada was physically manifest. Regarding that sentence in the Direction of Management, referring to some kind of constitution, the wording of it is far too unclear to conclude anything but that an ad hoc committee was to later be set up in order to form a constitution. However, neither that committee nor constitution ever materialized. 11 householders, all established leaders, along with one non-householder, although he married soon afterwards, were named as Prabhupada's direct representatives in the direction of management. Currently, none of these 11 are serving on what today we call the G.B.C. That charter, the direction of management, states that they were to act as Prabhupada's zonal secretaries while he was physically manifest and as his executors after he departed. Some opine that the G.B.C. was created, at least in part, in order to have the big guns fight amongst themselves rather than with Prabhupada. I'm inclined to accept that. The direction of management, however, was not shared with the temple presidents. It was considered top secret by most or all of the men listed in it as direct representatives. There is a reason why they hid it from the others. The governing commissioners Prabhupada appointed in the charter were to serve 3 years, although extensions of service could be granted. If not granted, if voted out by the temple presidents, then they were to return to their services in their original temples. If the temple presidents were to elect the G.B.C. from amongst themselves, then why were they not allowed to see the charter or even know of its existence? They had a fiduciary responsibility. Instead, the charter was locked in a safe and only a few knew about it. And those few, did they actually read it? It contained what were called particulars. These particulars contained orders. 2 particulars had tremendous significance, especially since a vote of all temple presidents of ISKCON was mandated by those 2 particulars, to be held no later than July of 1973. However, as you all know, this order was utterly neglected. Let us unpack those particulars of the vote. Prabhupada selected the first 12 commissioners. The last one he appointed, Krishna Das, did not want the post and soon thereafter resigned and was immediately replaced. That was well before the summer of 1973. All of the original commissioners were to serve for 3 years, and after that, they were all subject to be replaced or rotated by the vote of all ISKCON temple presidents. The presidents and their secretaries were their eligible replacements on the governing body. The original commissioners were also eligible to be on that ballot of temple presidents and secretaries, so they could be voted by the presidents to be reestablished on the board. All the temple presidents in Prabhupada's movement were to vote from those listed on the ballot, and the 8 from that ballot with the most votes were then to become the commissioners for the next 3-year term. Now also mentioned is that Prabhupada would retain 4 commissioners before the vote, and their names would thus not be on the ballot. It was really rather straightforward. However, this mandated vote in the governing body commission charter was never given a chance. That is known as deviation. That is known as gurur avagya, disobedience of the order of the Guru. That is known as gurva aparad, offense to the Guru. He was never consulted by any of them about this intentional neglect to hold the vote. Any conscientious commissioner would, at the bare minimum, have been duty-bound to have consulted him to seek his approval not to hold the vote. None of them did. Their motive not to have done so is blatantly obvious today, is it not? 1973 passed without that mandated vote having taken place. Worse, the fiduciary responsibilities of all the temple presidents in ISKCON could not possibly be fulfilled because it was still the case in 1973 that virtually none of them even knew about this charter. What to speak of particulars 2 and 3, which indicated, at least potentially, a significant turnover of membership on the governing board. Now let us turn to particular 1. It reads as follows. 1. The G.B.C. oversees all operations and management of ISKCON as it receives direction from Srila Prabhupada, and His Divine Grace has the final approval in all matters. Notice, final approval. Prabhupada having final approval in all matters means that he was superior to the governing body. This was proven beyond a shadow of a doubt when he suspended the governing board in April 1972 after 8 of its members attempted to centralize the money and manpower of the movement via a secret meeting in New York City. And Prabhupada invested power in the G.B.C., granted, but not supreme power. Nor did he invest absolute power in it. The proof being that it was suspended in the spring of 1972. Something that is absolute cannot be suspended. Prabhupada was the most powerful force in his movement, and he was absolute. The G.B.C. was meant to be an advisory commission. A commissioner was given a zone. He then traveled in his zone in order to observe how things were being run in the various centers within his zone. He then advised the president of a given center how to improve his operations, and whenever applicable, encouraged the temple president further in his service to the founder Acharya of the movement. The commissioner in any of the zones could not remove a temple president in his zone. That was not within his power. Nor could he give orders to the devotees serving in any of those centers, as that was reserved for the temple president. Those presidents also had the power and the fiduciary responsibility to vote on whether or not any commissioners were to be retained on the governing body, but virtually all of those temple presidents were never informed of this. And they were also not informed about particular 1, namely, that Prabhupada was more powerful than the G.B.C. and had final approval in all matters decided by any single G.B.C. or by the board as a whole. You may find that a bit dumbfounding. I can understand that. However, in the mid to late 70s, it was the G.B.C. which swung its might over everybody and everything. This was after Prabhupada, for all practical purposes, had been rendered a figurehead by its machinations, which he could hardly check by late 1976. Now, 3 of the remaining 9 particulars, 4 through 9, deserve some mention. The others that do not were connected to G.B.C. voting procedures, property management, and one shockingly obvious statement, which was nothing more than common sense. Particular 5 mandated that each of the 12 commissioners was to spend 1 month per year with Prabhupada as his personal secretary. This was hardly followed. They preferred engaging in power plays within their zones. Particular 8 required, quote, the support of local temple members, unquote, for any temple president to be removed from his post. At least 1 commissioner tried to circumvent this, but his attempt was thwarted. By Prabhupada, of course. However, since even the temple presidents were unaware of the direction of management, How many temple inmates knew of this responsibility they had in order to determine whether or not a president could remain in their center as president? They didn't even know they possessed this power, although it was in the direction of management. It was also made clear in the final particular, number 9, that the G.B.C. had no jurisdiction over Prabhupada's publications. Yet, somewhat paradoxically, the trustees for the BBT were also all members of this newly formed G.B.C., which could easily create a conflict of interest. We shall not go into that tangent. The document mentions ISKCON Press, indicating that it should continue publishing. The document also mentions at the very end that no one should live in Prabhupada's quarters during his absence. It is signed by Prabhupada, followed by signatures of the 3 appointed commissioners, aforementioned. 2 years later, all 3 of them would be part of that centralization conspiracy in New York City, which was also aforementioned. Now, on to another document called Topmost Urgency. Some devotees opine that this document called Topmost Urgency was the most important legal document produced by His Divine Grace. It was dated July 22nd, 1974. According to its instructions, it consisted of 2 amendments that were to be, and this was in all caps now, what I'm about to read, immediately added to all official registration documents, constitutions, incorporation papers. That order was never followed. Now, its intention was important, and although its intention was obviously important, in and of itself, it's a very sloppy document. This served to minimize its de facto importance. It mentions constitutions in plural, but no ISKCON centers had any constitutions, and ISKCON itself did not have a constitution, although that ad hoc committee was provisionally cited to be created in the direction of management, as we spoke of previously. Tatvamasi. Now, it appears that this Topmost Urgency document was some kind of effort to reinvigorate Prabhupada's superiority over the G.B.C., which was already established clearly in Particle 1 of the Direction of Management. In the Topmost Urgency document, point 1 reads in part, quote, "It is declared that His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada is the founder Acharya of ISKCON. He is the supreme authority in all matters of the society. His position cannot be occupied by anyone else, and his name and title must appear on all documents, letterheads, publications, and buildings of the society," unquote. At least one building organization did not qualify, and that, of course, was the Moundsville compound, which was in the name of Hayagriva, not in the name of Prabhupada, and he wasn't mentioned in it. Point 2 in Topmost Urgency reads as follows, quote, there shall be a governing board committee. Catch that now. There shall be a governing board committee. 2 of the words have been changed. There shall be a governing board committee of trustees appointed by the founder Acharya, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, according to the document Direction of Management dated July 28, 1970. The G.B.C. is to act as the instrument for the execution of the will of His Divine Grace through the Prabhupada, unquote. As aforementioned, this is a muddled document. The Governing Body Commission was created in July of 1970. Mentioned. Does this urgent amendment mean that a new body, now called the Governing Board Committee, was to be created? If so, on or by what date? Neither of these questions is answered in it. It says that the appointment of this Governing Board Committee is to be actuated according to the document Direction of Management, and it gives the date of the creation of that G.B.C. charter. However, if this, can we call it new, G.B.C. is to accord with that 1970 charter, a vote should have been held by all temple presidents in order to appoint 8 commissioners, and Prabhupada was to have retained 4 from that G.B.C. a year previous to this topmost urgent amendment. The topmost urgency's date is almost exactly 1 year after the vote mandated by the direction of management was supposed to have taken place, was mandated to have taken place by the charter authorizing the G.B.C. However, a nebulous intention in a document, even if it is a good one, a good intention, cannot possibly be carried out effectively with so many holes and question marks intrinsic to its wording and syntax, particularly in that second amendment of topmost urgency. Prabhupada signed the topmost urgency document on an approved line, approved, which is exactly what he did on the letter appointing 11 Ritviks in July 1977, a letter not dictated by him, but instead drawn up and signed by TKG. In the case of topmost urgency, it was signed by 2 commissioners as zonal secretaries, indirectly serving to also minimize its importance. Yet, this topmost urgency declaration was but another example of the ever-increasingly corrupt G.B.C. neglecting to do its duty. It should have insisted that the document, despite its flaws, be added as a codicil to all incorporation documents in the various states. This is only marginally difficult to do, but it was not done. Insidiously and perniciously, and very gradually and relentlessly, the G.B.C. continued down its chosen path of perdition by again neglecting the orders of the spiritual master, Gurur Avogya. The levee would break in 1978, of course, but the preparatory stage for that colossal hoax in March of that year was developing unabated in 1974 when the topmost urgency memo was thrown into the clutter room. Now we need a little bit of an overall perspective here, and we find in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 15, Text 12, the following, quote, "One aware of the principles of religion must reject 5 vidharmas, knowing these to be against real dharma. 1. Irreligion. 2. Dharmic principles practiced by others. 3. Pretentious dharma. 4. Analogical dharma. And 5. Cheating dharma." There are Sanskrit terms for each of these vidharmas. Dharma, as you all know, is generally rendered into English as quote-unquote religion, although such a translation is only partially accurate. In Vedic theistic teaching, also known as panentheism, there is only one supreme God, and he empowers demigods who act on his command and on his behalf. Please note that monotheism, which is the predominant religion of the West in 3 divisions, is a different concept from this. Nevertheless, to some limited degree, your host speaker will use the term religion due to its commonplace acceptance in the Western world. Much of what passes for theism is actually atheism in pious disguise. From the strict Vaishnava standpoint, atheism, disguised as dharma, is known by various titles, such as dualism, also known as Manichaeism, henotheism, panpsychism, which has become very popular, pantheism, and of course polytheism. Cheating dharma is called chala dharma in this shloka, although it is generally known as kaitava dharma. However, all 5 vidharmas that are mentioned are kaitava dharma, with chala dharma as a specific variety of kaitava dharma. Prabhupada, the guru of the Americans, propagated his movement for Westerners predominantly. Some would say that the Western manifestation of the Hare Krishna movement, even while it was following him, would be categorized also as a fifth dharma. According to this biased opinion, some American and European scholars say that Vaishnavism is not applicable for Westerners. We completely disagree with that. Of the 5 Vidharmas mentioned, the one that applies to so-called ISKCON, and by extension to its power node, the vitiated G.B.C, is pretentious religion. It is called Apasadharma in the text of this particular sloka. It obviously applies to the vitiated G.B.C in so many ways. The governing body attempts to impress its followers by drawing great importance unto itself, exponentially more than it actually possesses. It implies that it represents authority and in the process determines Krishna culture when it has no such authority. It presumes that its members are uniquely talented when compared to the others. But in point of fact, G.B.C members possess no laudable spiritual talents whatsoever. The G.B.C constitutes a show bottle, a semblance, an outward display. This is known as a pas. When its members are gurus, they are often ostentatious. Their imposition of importance, sometimes in order to justify G.B.C faulty resolutions, is always in poor taste. The G.B.C appears to have value, but that is also nothing more than a pretension. It is a vain, glorious, dangerous aberration. Your host speaker reminds all of you, once again, of Prabhupada's chief maxim: you need a bona fide guru. The bona fide guru initiates his disciple. If the prospective disciple requires a bona fide guru, how can there be a genuine initiation received from anyone but a bona fide guru? That's a rhetorical question. You all know the answer. No genuine guru can be produced in an institution that is apasadharma. Only institutional gurus and sahajiyas emerge from such an environment. The 11 great pretenders of the late 70s and the first half of the 80s were all full-blown sahajiyas, some more than others. No genuine bhakti initiation was performed by any of them. This logically means that none of those allegedly initiated disciples were genuinely initiated. It's a hard truth, and as could only be expected, almost all of those misled disciples are inclined to not only resist that conclusion, but to attack it. Nevertheless, it remains the right conclusion. Prabhupada warned about it early on in one of his first purports to Chaitanya Charitamrita, chapter 1, text 35, as follows, quote, one should always remember that a person who is reluctant to accept a spiritual master and be initiated is sure to be baffled in his endeavor to go back to Godhead. One who is not properly initiated may present himself as a great devotee, but in fact he is sure to encounter many stumbling blocks on his path of progress towards spiritual realization, with the result that he must continue his term of material existence without relief. Such a helpless person is compared to a ship without a rudder, for such a ship can never reach its destination, unquote. Now, unless that disciple becomes a fanatic, the bogus guru is unable to destroy his doubts. There are such hammerhead fanatics out there, let me tell you. And somewhat ironically, at least one of them is against so-called ISKCON. If the new man does not make that fanatical leap, then that improperly initiated person, and there are thousands of them now, will gradually become despondent. A bogus guru cannot give knowledge to his falsely initiated disciple, and the helpless follower will again become attracted to material happiness. In due course, such a weak disciple of a bogus spiritual master will become hopeless and discouraged, and after this, assailed by never-ending doubts, and then he'll throw the baby out with the bathwater, or he'll become a hammerhead. Those doubts will, in many if not most cases, be precipitated by his eventual analysis of how the power node of so-called ISKCON has run the whole show for the past 4+ decades. Obviously, we're talking about the vitiated G.B.C. It has been one deviation after another, almost on a regular basis. We're going to be detailing 12 of them very soon in this presentation. Now, in the beginning, some of the deviations were relatively minor and were able to be overcome, but others have been cataclysmic. Let us consider one of those. The Acharya Board, in 1978, secured prominence via its power block comprised of 11 big guns. They constituted the chief power block once they were appointed as Ritviks in July of 1977. The G.B.C. was always under the thumb of the ascendant power block within it at any given time, and that power block at that time was controlled by one powerful man. Although that changed. It changed when the Acharya Board surfaced. Such was not the case when the Acharya Board assumed its superior independent status within the G.B.C., which was cent% unauthorized, this Acharya Board. The two most powerful men had to agree to cooperate at that time, and they did so, indirectly without formal declaration. Those were the two taproots of the colossal hoax, namely TKG and Kirtanananda. They did not like one another whatsoever. However, this concoction of the Acharya Board benefited both of them, so they did not allow any kind of divergence between them to ensue concerning it. Although Ocean's 11 constituted just under half of the votes of the G.B.C., the others would never attempt to override that power block. Never. Their interests always had some connection to at least some of the biggest guns. Quite likely, the majority of the lesser commissioners were bamboozled by one or more of those 11, considering them pure devotees. I have practical experience of that. I know that to be the case. It was obvious that the 11 zonals were, for all practical purposes, the governing body at that time. As such, it is a misconception that the G.B.C. was a power separate from the Acharya Board, just waiting to come in and take over. De facto, such was not the case. It gave its imprimatur to the zonal Acharya hoax, granted, but it did so because its 11 most powerful men completely controlled it and engineered that ruling to their great advantage. When that initial power block faltered, a new one formed. It was led by Professor Blueblood, a senior devotee and temple president. He was voted in as a member of the G.B.C. as a result of his powerful position papers. The power block of the 11, unconquerable in the late 70s, cracked and then cratered. It began with the chastisements and suspensions of TKG and Hangsadutta, along with a rebellion by Jayatirtha, a flagrant sahajya of the very worst variety. The power block of the late 70s began to crumble when some of its own members, down to 9, with the de facto excommunication of Hangsadutta in May of 1983 and Jayatirtha's breakaway, removed their ornate vyasasans from the temple rooms. In their zones, that change corresponded with them no longer being worshipped as Uttama-adhikaris on that so-called Vyasa-san. As such, it is a misconception that the whole of the G.B.C. has always been the power block behind the scenes. It was never the power behind the scenes. The block that constituted the real power, whichever was predominant in the ascendant, determined what G.B.C. resolved. The G.B.C. took action when the most powerful within it changed its composition in the mid-80s, forced to do so by that new power block mentioned previously, opposed to the remaining zonals. By the early 80s, gurus had also expanded in number. New gurus now numbered more than the original zonals in the mid-80s, and a different power block with a different agenda, buttressed by the temple presidents who very much wanted a change from the zonals, overturned the previous first transformation only to replace it with another unauthorized transformation. Now, as promised, the G.B.C. deviation timeline consists of these historical events. 1. From the summer of 1970 to the summer of 1973, the temple presidents were not informed by the G.B.C. of their fiduciary responsibility to vote for a ballot of mostly themselves, which could result in up to 8 new commissioners. This vote was mandated in the G.B.C. charter, but the governing body commission ignored the mandate and refused to inform the temple presidents about that mandate. 2. In early 1972, 8 commissioners attempted to centralize the temples and their finances via a secret meeting in New York City, leading to the suspension of the commission in April of that year by Prabhupada. 3. The aforementioned vote was never held in the summer of 1973. To top it all off, Prabhupada was not even consulted about this negligence as to whether or not he approved of it, despite its being specified in the charter known as the Direction of Management. The vitiated G.B.C. just decided on its own to ignore the mandate in its own authorizing charter. 4. In late 1973, the G.B.C. indirectly approved, made no attempt to curtail, the introduction of disguises intrinsic to the plainclothes pick, the great grift. Prabhupada had specifically forbade it and wanted Vaishnava identity marks on the bodies of all his collectors, but his order was not known by virtually everyone, and it was overridden by the G.B.C., at least by one G.B.C., Kurandar. 5. In 1974, very likely related to the negligence of the aforementioned vote in the previous year, a topmost urgency memo was approved by Prabhupada. It was supposed to be added to all important ISKCON certificates and articles of incorporation, but it was not, at least not to any significant extent. 6. In the spring of 1975, at the Mayapur Convention, Prabhupada told a large gathering of the G.B.C. men there that they could take the movement, he would leave, and he would only take his beads and bead bag with him. 7. In 1977, the G.B.C. made no effort to check the Machiavellian manipulator, TKG, from remaining Prabhupada's secretary, despite the fact that this position was to be rotated, and it was never to be consolidated like it was by TKG at that time. The result of TKG doing this was to prevent clarification about what was to be the future status of the movement, how it was to continue, particularly relating to future initiations, after Prabhupada departed physical manifestation. As such, though somewhat indirectly, the G.B.C., by allowing TKG to call all of the shots during those final months, was responsible for essential orders by Prabhupada to be disobeyed. Two examples, and there were more examples than two, but two examples of such orders were his order to have all of his disciples come to see him in Vrindavan during his final months, along with his order to be taken out on parikram during those final months. 8. In late 1977, the vitiated G.B.C. made no effort to check Kirtanananda taking Uttama Udhikari worship from his own god brothers and god sisters at his Moundsville compound in West Virginia. It made no effort to check him from conducting initiation ceremonies of new people there either. 9. In the spring of 1978, the G.B.C. decided to meet with Swami B.R. Sridhar at his Navadvip compound, at least once, probably twice, and in doing so, lapped up all kinds of bad advice from that man. The commission actually made this decision by first voting to do so, overriding one of its own, who strongly advised that he was a mutt-breaker and advised against this consultation. But he was defeated in the vote, big time. 10. As a result, the vitiated G.B.C., having already agreed with TKG that the Ritviks, appointed in the summer of 1977, would then automatically become initiating spiritual masters, took the Navadvip Mahant's advice to divide the world into 11 zones by each of those Ritviks, who no longer were even Ritviks because Prabhupada had disappeared. Such a geographically determined guru is 100% anti-Vedic and anti-Vaishnav. They took the Navadvip Mahant's bad advice that all 11 of those men were to be worshipped as Uttama Adhikaris in their specified zones. They took his bad advice to create an Acharya board within the G.B.C., specifically forbidden by Prabhupada, the net effect being that those 11 could not be controlled by the G.B.C. as a whole. 11. After one fiasco after another subsequently developed as a result of this unauthorized first transformation in March of 1978, the G.B.C. eventually ruled that the Vyasasans in the temples of its initiating gurus had to be removed and their opulent worship terminated. However, the vitiated G.B.C. also ruled that for the remaining initiators who were in good standing with the cult, that they were to still be spiritual masters. Oh yeah. And that all of their disciples were still initiated. In effect, the G.B.C. ruled that they now were to be considered Madhyam Adhikari Diksha Gurus, although they were never any such thing at any time. They were all Sahajiyas, or mixed devotees. 12. In 2019, now enduring its third transformation, the Hinduization of the movement, the vitiated G.B.C., a broken arrow, voted to certify female Diksha Gurus as Madhyam Adhikaris despite many Shastric injunctions forbidding it. All the promises the commissioners made came to nothing, as nothing was ever confronted at the base level. There was a never-ending series of deception after deception after deception, and it all began with the neglect of the G.B.C. Charter's directive to hold that vote for a rotating membership on the board in the summer of 1973. The vitiated G.B.C. is a broken arrow. It is the power node of an Uppa Sampradaya. It is a Vitharma, known technically as Apasatharma. It is all a pretension. It has promulgated never-ending quarrel and hypocrisy, fully in synchronization with the degraded nature of this age. Yet, because it appears to have a genuine founder, and because it has beautiful deities, and because it still appears to have a Vaishnava Sampradaya connection, its version of apparent theism could become something which the powers that be could accept as an alternative. They will need, very much need, a theistic alternative to hold things together when all hell breaks loose after the current hedonism and nihilism reaches its apogee. That moment is coming sooner than many of you think. Horrific atrocities will ensue if the vitiated G.B.C. is able to gain political power from behind the curtain. Now, I have much practical experience that improperly initiated people mock this developing situation that I'm talking about. They are unable to see this even as a possibility, what to speak of the probability it actually is. They cannot be allowed to influence us. The vitiated G.B.C. is an aberration now, but it could become far, far worse. Today, it's only dangerous for those who enter its wheelhouse. However, if everything breaks fatefully right for it, that Sahajya governing body could become far more powerful tomorrow. If that transpires, the price to be paid on the macro level is high. However, at that time, if you do not cooperate in successfully exposing it today, you will also pay for that negligence of duty at that time when it comes for you. Sadeva Samya.